For centuries, seekers have misunderstood one of the most powerful spiritual secrets ever spoken. When the Master said you need faith, like a mustard seed, to move mountains, nearly everyone got it backwards. They thought it meant having a tiny bit of faith that grows bigger. That interpretation has kept millions trapped in struggle. The mustard seed teaching is not about quantity of faith at all. It is about the quality and nature of that faith. A mustard seed does not try to become a tree. It does not affirm or visualize or beg to grow. It simply contains within itself the complete intelligence and power to fulfill its destiny without effort or doubt. This is the consciousness secret Joel Goldsmith spent his life teaching. Your faith must be like that seed, not in size, but in naturalness. It is not about believing harder or longer. It is about resting in the truth that spiritual law operates as automatically as that seed becomes a tree, without your mental gymnastics. When you finally understand this distinction, everything changes. You stop trying to manufacture faith through repetition and start recognizing the faith that already exists within your consciousness, waiting to unfold as naturally as breath. The world teaches you to pump yourself up with affirmations, to convince yourself through repetition that what you want is already yours. This creates exhausting mental effort. You are trying to make something happen through the force of your belief, and when results do not come quickly, you assume your faith was too weak or too small. But Joel Goldsmith revealed a startling truth. Faith is not something you create or build. It is something you uncover. It already exists in your consciousness as surely as the tree exists in the seed. Your work is not to generate faith, but to remove the mental interference blocking its natural expression and operation. Think about how a seed grows in darkness underground. It does not see the sun, yet it moves toward it with absolute certainty. This is not blind faith or wishful thinking. It is recognition of spiritual law already operating. The seed does not doubt because it is one with the intelligence that created it, completely unified. Your consciousness contains that same divine intelligence. When you stop trying to create faith and start recognizing the spiritual law already present within you, mountains begin to move. Not through your effort, but through the automatic operation of consciousness aligned with truth and divine principle. Here is where most spiritual teaching goes wrong. They tell you to have faith in your faith, to believe that your belief will produce results. This creates a vicious circle of mental strain. You are believing in your ability to believe strongly enough, which is exhausting and ultimately ineffective in transformation. Joel Goldsmith taught something radically different. Your faith must not be in your faith at all. Your faith must be in the spiritual principle itself, in the invisible law that operates regardless of your awareness of it. Gravity works whether you believe in it or not. Spiritual law operates with the same impersonal perfection. The mustard seed does not have faith in its own faith. It has faith in the law of growth, in the intelligence that designed it, in the soil and sun and rain that are already provided. It rests in the certainty that everything needed for its fulfillment already exists, not as future possibility, but as present reality. When you shift from faith in your mental state to faith in spiritual law, you stop exhausting yourself. You stop checking constantly to see if you believe enough. You simply rest in the recognition that the law is operating, and your only job is to not interfere with mental resistance. This revelation transforms everything about how you approach healing, manifestation, and spiritual growth. You are no longer trying to convince God or the universe through the intensity of your belief. You are recognizing that divine intelligence is already acting, already knowing, already providing everything necessary for your wholeness. The mustard seed never worries if it has enough faith. It contains complete trust in the process without questioning or analyzing. This is the quality of faith you must cultivate, not through effort but through understanding. When you see that spiritual law operates as perfectly as mathematical law, your consciousness shifts. This is not passive waiting or lazy hoping. It is active recognition and conscious resting in truth. You are alert to the presence of divine intelligence operating in your life, but you are not manipulating or forcing. You are allowing consciousness to unfold its inherent perfection naturally. In the next few minutes, we will explore exactly how to apply this revolutionary understanding. You will learn to identify when you are trying to create faith versus recognizing it, You will discover how to remove mental interference, and you will experience the transformation that comes from mustard seed consciousness in operation. Maria struggled with chronic pain for 8 years. She tried every technique, repeated affirmations thousands of times, visualized perfect health daily. She was exhausted from trying to believe hard enough. Then she discovered Joel Goldsmith's mustard seed teaching and everything shifted, though not instantly. The first week, Maria simply stopped trying to create faith. She stopped her endless affirmations and visualizations. Instead, she began each morning recognizing that spiritual law knows nothing of pain or limitation. She was not trying to convince herself of this. She was simply acknowledging truth regardless of her physical experience. For 3 weeks, nothing seemed to change. But Maria noticed something different inside. The desperate mental effort was gone. She was not anxiously checking her pain levels or rating her faith. She was simply resting in the recognition that divine intelligence operates perfectly, whether she feels it immediately or not. In the 4th week, she woke one morning and realized the pain had decreased by half. She did not celebrate or fear losing progress. She simply continued resting in spiritual law. Over 3 months, the pain dissolved completely, not through her mental gymnastics, but through non-interference with consciousness already operating toward wholeness. David faced financial collapse after his business failed. Everyone told him to affirm abundance, to visualize money flowing, to have faith he would be rescued. He tried desperately, but his faith felt hollow because circumstances screamed the opposite. The harder he tried to believe, the more exhausted he became mentally. When David learned the true mustard seed principle, he made a radical shift. He stopped trying to manufacture feelings of abundance or convince himself money was coming. Instead, he began recognizing that spiritual intelligence governs supply as perfectly as it governs the seasons, and this recognition required no emotional proof. The practice felt strange at first. When bills arrived, instead of panicking or forcing positive thoughts, David would simply acknowledge that divine law knows nothing of lack or insufficiency. He was not denying the bills existed. He was refusing to accept them as the final truth of his being. Over 6 months, unexpected opportunities appeared, not through magic, but through David's consciousness becoming receptive rather than desperate. A former colleague offered partnership in a new venture. Clients from years past suddenly returned. The shift happened because David stopped interfering with spiritual intelligence operating through his consciousness naturally. Jennifer wanted to heal her damaged relationship with her daughter. They had not spoken in 2 years after bitter conflicts. She prayed constantly, visualized reunion, tried to have faith they would reconcile. But nothing changed because her faith was really fear disguised as hope, forcing outcomes. Joel Goldsmith's teaching showed Jennifer her mistake. She was trying to use faith as a tool to manipulate circumstances and force healing. Real mustard seed faith meant recognizing that love is the nature of spiritual consciousness, operating whether the outer picture shows it or not, beyond her control. Jennifer stopped her mental campaigns to create reconciliation. Instead, she began each day recognizing that divine love governs all relationships, that spiritual law knows only wholeness and unity. She sent no manipulative texts or forced contact. She simply rested in truth, operating beyond her limited vision of how healing should appear. 8 months later, her daughter called unexpectedly. The conversation was tentative but genuine. Over a year, they slowly rebuilt trust. Jennifer understood this happened not because her faith produced results, but because her non-interference allowed consciousness to operate naturally. The healing was already happening invisibly before any outer change appeared. These stories reveal the pattern. Transformation happens not through intensity of belief, but through recognition of spiritual law already operating. Maria, David, and Jennifer each stopped exhausting themselves, trying to create enough faith. They shifted to resting in the automatic operation of divine intelligence, like the seed rests in growth law. This is not instant magic or overnight miracles. Notice the time frames: weeks, months, even a year. True spiritual consciousness unfolds according to its own intelligence, not your anxious timeline. Your job is not to speed it up through mental effort, but to stop slowing it down through interference and resistance. The mustard seed does not grow faster when you dig it up daily to check progress. Your healing, supply, and relationships do not accelerate when you constantly measure your faith level or doubt the process. You must learn the art of recognition without manipulation, of trust without control, of faith as resting rather than striving. If these transformation stories inspire you to understand faith differently, like this video to help others discover this revolutionary teaching, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey today. Beyond the basic mustard seed principle, Joel Goldsmith taught specific techniques to help you shift from manufactured faith to recognize truth. The first technique is what he called spiritual awareness rather than mental treatment. You stop trying to change conditions and start recognizing what is already spiritually true, regardless of appearances or feelings. When you face a challenge, your habit is to immediately begin mental work to fix it. You pray for change, affirm the opposite, visualize solutions. This entire approach assumes something is wrong that your mind must correct. But mustard seed consciousness recognizes that spiritual reality is already perfect, complete, and operating according to divine law. Here is the practice. When confronting any problem, pause before rushing into mental treatment. Ask yourself not what you need to believe or visualize, but what is already spiritually true about this situation. If it is illness, the spiritual truth is that divine life is the only life, incapable of disease or deterioration. You are not trying to make this true through faith. You are recognizing it is already true, operating invisibly beneath the visible condition. Your awareness of this truth does not cause healing. Your awareness allows healing that is already happening in consciousness to manifest outwardly, without your mental interference blocking the natural flow. The second complementary technique is what Joel called the practice of not outlining. This is crucial because most people sabotage their own spiritual unfoldment by demanding specific outcomes. You pray for healing but specify exactly how and when it should appear. You ask for supply but insist it come through particular channels. The mustard seed does not tell the universe it wants to be exactly 4 feet tall by next Tuesday. It contains the intelligence to fulfill its nature, and it trusts the process completely. When you outline specific results, you are operating from limited human perception, blocking infinite intelligence from working in ways beyond your imagination. Practice releasing all pictures of how your good should appear. If you need healing, recognize spiritual wholeness without demanding the symptoms disappear by Friday. If you need supply, acknowledge divine abundance without insisting your employer give you a raise. Let spiritual law operate according to its own perfect intelligence. This feels risky to the human mind. You fear that without specific demands, nothing will happen. But the opposite is true. When you stop limiting infinite intelligence with your tiny mental pictures, consciousness is free to manifest your good in ways far exceeding anything you could have outlined or forced. The third technique is daily recognition practice that Joel called treatment in the absolute. You set aside time not to pray for things or people, but simply to recognize spiritual truth for its own sake. This builds consciousness that operates automatically, like breathing, without constant effort or checking results. Spend 10 minutes each morning recognizing truth regardless of circumstances. Divine intelligence is the only power. Spiritual law governs all. Life is eternal and whole. You are not trying to make these statements produce results. You are training consciousness to rest naturally in truth the way a seed rests in soil. This practice seems to have no immediate practical application. You are not focusing on your specific problems or needs, but this is exactly why it works. You are building a consciousness of truth that operates beneath all circumstances, creating a foundation from which solutions emerge naturally rather than through desperate mental effort. Over weeks and months, you notice something profound. Problems that would have triggered panic and frantic prayers now barely disturb you. Not because you have become passive, but because your consciousness rests in something deeper than circumstances. You are living from mustard seed faith that operates automatically, requiring less and less conscious effort. The fourth technique Joel taught is instantaneous recognition in the midst of crisis. When fear or doubt strikes suddenly, you do not need a 30-minute meditation to remember truth. You have trained consciousness to snap immediately into recognition of spiritual law operating, regardless of the alarming appearance demanding your attention. Someone calls with devastating news. Your first response is not panic or prayer for intervention. It is instant recognition. Divine intelligence is operating perfectly right now. This does not deny the problem exists in appearance. It refuses to accept appearance as the final truth overriding spiritual law. This becomes second nature with practice. Like a musician who no longer thinks about finger placement, you begin recognizing spiritual truth automatically in every situation. Your consciousness shifts from reactive fear to responsive trust. Not trust in outcomes matching your desires, but trust in spiritual law operating according to divine intelligence. These 4 techniques work together. Daily recognition builds consciousness. Non-outlining releases control. Spiritual awareness shifts focus from fixing to recognizing. Instant recognition handles crises. Combined with the basic mustard seed principle, they create a completely transformed approach to life where faith is no longer something you manufacture but something you rest in naturally. The most common obstacle people encounter is the gap between recognition and manifestation. You recognize spiritual truth faithfully for days or weeks, but circumstances remain unchanged or even worsen. Your mind screams that the teaching is not working, that you are doing something wrong, that perhaps you lack sufficient faith after all. Joel Goldsmith addressed this challenge directly. The gap between spiritual recognition and visible manifestation is not evidence of failure. It is the testing ground where shallow mental agreement becomes deep consciousness. The seed does not doubt during the invisible growing period underground. Your faith must maintain recognition even when outer evidence contradicts. This is not blind stubbornness or denial of reality. It is understanding that spiritual cause precedes material effect, sometimes by weeks or months. When you plant a seed, you do not dig it up after 3 days to check if it is working. You trust the invisible process. Your spiritual recognition is planting seeds in consciousness. The temptation is to abandon the practice when quick results do not appear. But this is precisely when your faith is shifting from mental technique to consciousness. If you return to old patterns of desperate prayer and anxious affirmation, you interrupt the natural unfoldment. Stay with recognition regardless of timing. Trust the invisible process. Another challenge is the voice of reason that calls spiritual recognition foolish or irresponsible. When facing serious illness, financial crisis, or relationship breakdown, practical people tell you to stop all this mystical nonsense and take real action. Your own mind joins the chorus, insisting that recognition without action is lazy escapism. Joel taught that spiritual recognition and practical action are not opposites. You act from consciousness rather than panic. When you recognize spiritual law operating, you become receptive to divine intelligence guiding appropriate action. But the action flows from trust rather than desperation, from recognition rather than fear, from consciousness rather than mental manipulation. The difference is profound. Fear-based action is frantic, controlling, exhausting. Consciousness-based action is peaceful, effective, sustainable. You are not forcing outcomes through willpower. You are allowing intelligence to guide you, taking steps that feel right, without anxiety about results matching your limited vision of success. If someone criticizes your approach as passive or impractical, you need not defend or explain. Simply continue recognizing spiritual truth while taking whatever actions consciousness guides. Over time, results will speak louder than arguments. Your life becomes evidence that faith as recognition rather than manipulation actually works in practical reality. The third major obstacle is doubt that arises from past failures. You have tried spiritual techniques before. You had faith, you prayed, you visualized, and nothing happened. Now when you hear about mustard seed faith, your mind whispers that this will fail too. Past disappointment creates resistance to present recognition. Joel would say your past attempts failed not because spiritual law does not work, but because you were operating from manufactured faith rather than recognized truth. You were trying to use faith as a tool to get what you wanted, rather than resting in spiritual principle operating regardless of personal desire or outcome. This time is different not because you are trying harder, but because you understand differently. You are not attempting to create enough faith to move mountains. You are recognizing that spiritual law moves mountains automatically when consciousness stops interfering. The seed never failed. Your digging it up constantly to check progress prevented natural growth. Release your past spiritual disappointments. They were learning experiences showing you what does not work. Now you are approaching faith in an entirely new way. Not as manufactured belief, but as recognized law. Let go of fear that this will fail like previous attempts. This is not another technique. This is consciousness transformation. The final major obstacle is the addiction to seeing and measuring progress. You want evidence that your recognition is working. You check your bank account daily when practicing supply consciousness. You monitor symptoms hourly when recognizing health. This constant measuring is itself the interference blocking natural unfoldment. The mustard seed grows in darkness without measurement. It does not pause growth to verify progress every few hours. When you constantly check whether your recognition is producing results, you are operating from doubt disguised as vigilance. Real faith as recognition requires releasing all need for immediate visible confirmation. Practice blind recognition. Acknowledge spiritual truth operating whether you see evidence or not. When the urge to check progress arises, recognize it as interference and return to simple truth. Divine intelligence is operating perfectly right now. Spiritual law knows only wholeness. Your good is unfolding according to wisdom beyond human sight. If these obstacle-breaking techniques speak to your heart and show you why faith has not worked before, like to support this transformative content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment which obstacle you are ready to release right now. Advanced integration means applying mustard seed consciousness to every area of life simultaneously, not just your current crisis. Joel Goldsmith lived this teaching, not as a technique for emergencies, but as his permanent state of being. He woke each morning resting in spiritual truth before circumstances demanded it. Begin integrating recognition into mundane moments. Waiting in traffic, recognize divine order operating. Preparing meals, acknowledge infinite supply. Interacting with difficult people, see spiritual identity beyond personality. These micro-recognitions build consciousness that operates automatically, so when crisis comes, you do not have to manufacture faith suddenly. This is not adding more spiritual busywork to your day. It is shifting the foundation from which you live. Instead of moving through life in human consciousness and switching to spiritual consciousness only when problems arise, you maintain spiritual recognition as your baseline, and human concerns become the temporary interruption. The challenge here is consistency without strain. You are not trying to maintain perfect awareness every second. That creates exhausting hypervigilance. You are simply returning to recognition naturally throughout the day, the way you return to breathing without thinking about it. This builds consciousness that requires less and less conscious effort over time. Another advanced application is recognizing spiritual truth for others without telling them or trying to fix them. When someone shares a problem, your habit is to offer advice, sympathy, or try to help practically. Joel taught something deeper. Silently recognize spiritual truth about that person, knowing that consciousness is one and your recognition affects the whole. Someone tells you about their illness. Instead of sympathizing with the disease or advising treatment, you silently recognize their spiritual wholeness. You do not share this recognition or try to convince them. You simply hold truth in consciousness, knowing that spiritual law operates for them whether they are aware of it or not. This practice feels strange because you appear to do nothing visible. But consciousness is cause, and consciousness is shared. Your recognition of spiritual truth about another person is not wishful thinking or metaphysical manipulation. It is acknowledging what is already true, allowing that truth to operate without the interference of mutual fear and sympathy. Do not tell people you are recognizing truth for them. This often creates resistance or dependence. Simply maintain spiritual awareness silently while interacting normally. Offer practical help when appropriate, but from consciousness of their wholeness rather than belief in their limitation. This combination of practical compassion and spiritual recognition serves others most effectively. Advanced practice also means recognizing spiritual truth in the face of seeming tragedy or permanent limitation. This is where mustard seed faith proves its depth. Anyone can recognize truth when circumstances are mildly challenging. Can you recognize spiritual law operating when the diagnosis is terminal, or the loss seems final, or the limitation appears permanent? Joel faced this repeatedly in his healing practice. People came after doctors declared their cases hopeless. He did not try to convince himself or them that everything would be fine. He simply recognized that spiritual life knows nothing of terminal or hopeless, that divine intelligence is operating regardless of medical pronouncement. This does not mean you deny practical reality or stop appropriate treatment. It means you refuse to accept material appearance as the final truth overriding spiritual law. You recognize both the appearance and the deeper truth simultaneously, holding spiritual reality as the ultimate substance beneath visible conditions. Not everyone who received Joel's recognition experienced physical healing, but everyone experienced consciousness shift, peace that transcends circumstances, spiritual awakening regardless of body changes. This is true healing, consciousness recognizing its spiritual nature even when material conditions remain challenging. Faith as recognition succeeds even when faith as outcome demanding appears to fail. The ultimate advanced application is living from permanent spiritual identity rather than temporary human personality. You begin recognizing yourself as consciousness in which all experience appears, rather than a person having consciousness. This is the deepest meaning of mustard seed faith. Your very nature is spiritual law operating. This sounds abstract, but it transforms everything. When you identify as consciousness rather than body or person, challenges lose their power to define you. You face illness, lack, or conflict not as threats to your being, but as temporary appearances within consciousness that you are. The seed is one with the intelligence that created it, completely unified. Practice this throughout the day. Instead of thinking I am sick or I am broke or I am afraid, recognize I am the consciousness in which sickness, lack, and fear appear temporarily. You are not denying the experience. You are shifting identity from the experience to the consciousness witnessing it, which remains whole regardless. This is Joel Goldsmith's ultimate secret. Faith like a mustard seed means recognizing your spiritual identity as surely as the seed recognizes its nature. You stop trying to have enough faith and start being the consciousness in which all faith and doubt, all success and failure, all life and death appear. From this recognition, mountains move naturally. Now we arrive at total transformation, seeing your entire life through the lens of mustard seed consciousness. You no longer divide experience into spiritual moments and ordinary moments. Everything becomes opportunity to recognize spiritual law operating, from waking to sleeping, from challenge to triumph, from crisis to peace. Your morning coffee is not just caffeine intake. It is recognition of divine substance sustaining all life. Your work is not just earning money. It is consciousness expressing infinite creativity and supply. Your relationships are not just human interactions. They are spiritual identities recognizing themselves in each other, beyond personality and conflict. This does not make you disconnected or impractical. You become more effective, not less. When you stop exhausting yourself trying to manufacture faith for everything, energy flows into actions guided by consciousness rather than panic. You accomplish more with less effort because you are not fighting reality but recognizing deeper reality operating. People may notice something different about you. Not that you are suddenly perfect or problem-free, but you carry a quality of unshakable peace beneath circumstances. You face challenges without the desperate edge that characterizes most human struggle. You have discovered what Joel called conscious union with God, living as the mustard seed lives, one with the intelligence expressing through it. The transformation extends beyond your personal life into how you see the entire world. When you watch the news, you no longer sink into despair about humanity's problems. You recognize spiritual law operating beneath all appearances, working toward harmony even through chaos. This is not naive optimism. It is faith as spiritual recognition rather than hope for preferred outcomes. You begin seeing every person as consciousness expressing in unique form, even those whose actions you find difficult or harmful. You do not condone wrong behavior, but you refuse to see anyone as ultimately separated from spiritual intelligence. Your recognition of their spiritual identity does not depend on their recognition of it. This creates a life of profound peace without passivity. You take action when consciousness guides. You speak truth when appropriate. You set boundaries when necessary. But underneath all activity, you rest in the recognition that spiritual law is operating perfectly, that divine intelligence is unfolding according to wisdom you cannot fully see. Your transformation becomes silent testimony to others, You do not preach or explain unless asked. You simply live from mustard seed consciousness, and others notice the difference. Some ask about your peace. Others criticize your strange faith. All responses are fine. You are not trying to convert anyone. You are simply being the seed that grows naturally. As transformation deepens, you realize the teaching was never about moving physical mountains. The mountains that move are the mountains of consciousness, fear, doubt, limitation, separation, unworthiness. These inner mountains that have blocked your experience of wholeness dissolve in the presence of spiritual recognition operating naturally. You look back at where you began, exhausted from trying to create enough faith to change circumstances. Now you rest in recognition that spiritual law operates regardless of your awareness or effort. This is not laziness. It is the hardest and most subtle work, getting yourself and your mental manipulation out of the way. The paradox is complete. You have more faith now not because you tried harder to believe, but because you stopped trying altogether. You discovered that faith like a mustard seed means being what you are spiritually, rather than trying to have what you lack humanly. The seed does not try to be a tree. It simply is what it is, naturally. Joel Goldsmith spent decades teaching this single principle in countless variations. Now you understand why he never tired of pointing to this truth. It is not just another spiritual technique. It is the revelation that consciousness itself is the substance of all form, and recognizing this dissolves the entire struggle of human existence. You are not the same person who began this teaching. You cannot be. You have discovered that everything you sought through faith was already present in consciousness, waiting for recognition rather than creation. The healing, supply, peace, love, and wholeness you pursued were never absent, only unrecognized. This is the final secret Joel wanted you to know. You are the mustard seed, not your personality, not your body, not your circumstances. The consciousness reading these words right now is spiritual intelligence itself, containing everything needed for its complete expression. Your only work is removing the interference of manufactured faith and resting in recognition. Go forward living from this consciousness. When challenges arise, remember you are not a person trying to have enough faith to move mountains. You are consciousness itself, and mountains move naturally when you stop interfering with mental gymnastics. Recognize, rest, and watch spiritual law operate according to its own perfect intelligence. If your understanding of faith has been completely transformed by these Joel Goldsmith revelations, like this video to help others discover this life-changing truth. Subscribe for more teachings that shift consciousness, and comment, "I am the mustard seed," to claim your spiritual identity.
When most of us think about Christianity, we envision a path of following Jesus, adhering to his teachings, emulating his virtues, and worshipping him as separate from ourselves. But what if Jesus never actually wanted followers? What if, instead, he was inviting us into a radical recognition that would transform the very foundation of our spiritual understanding? Have you ever wondered why, despite years of devout prayer and faithful practice, you still feel a profound distance between yourself and the divine? What if everything you've been taught about your relationship with God is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Jesus' most revolutionary teaching? Has this ever happened to you? You find yourself in a moment of crisis, desperately praying for divine intervention, feeling like your words are merely echoing in an empty room. That sense of separation, that feeling of distance between you and God, isn't just uncomfortable. It's the very illusion Jesus came to dispel. The revolutionary truth hidden in plain sight throughout Scripture is that Jesus wasn't establishing a religion of followers, but awakening us to our inherent divinity. When he boldly proclaimed, "You are gods," in John 10:34, he wasn't speaking metaphorically or making some special claim only about himself. He was revealing the fundamental truth about your actual identity, a truth so profound that religious institutions have often obscured it because of its revolutionary implications. Most of us have been conditioned since childhood to approach our spiritual journey from a position of fundamental separation. We've been taught to view ourselves as somehow distant from the divine, like orphans pleading with a stranger for help or intervention. We beg, we plead, we bargain, all from this underlying assumption that we are somehow disconnected from the very source of life itself. But this is precisely what makes Jesus' approach so radically different. When you examine his words and actions closely, you notice something remarkable. Jesus never begged, he never pleaded. He spoke with the unwavering confidence of someone who fully understood his relationship with the divine source. This wasn't arrogance or spiritual pride. It was the natural expression of someone who recognized an eternal truth that existed before time began. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely reshape how you understand your place in the cosmos and your relationship with the divine. The distinction between following Jesus and becoming as he is represents the difference between perpetual spiritual seeking and genuine spiritual awakening. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. What Jesus understood, and what he was desperately trying to help us understand, is that the divine nature isn't something external to you that you need to somehow reach through spiritual effort. It's your original nature, your true identity beneath all the layers of conditioning and false beliefs about separation. This isn't just a beautiful spiritual theory. It's the fundamental reality of your existence that changes everything about how you experience life. When you truly grasp what Jesus meant by declaring your divine nature, everything transforms. Your prayers shift from desperate pleas to conscious recognition. Your spiritual practice evolves from striving to allowing. Your entire experience changes from struggle into natural, effortless unfolding. Imagine for a moment what your life would look like if you approached each day, each challenge, each relationship from the same consciousness that Jesus had when he declared, "You are God's." How would your experience transform if you truly lived from that understanding? The truth is, we've been reading these words through the lens of religious formality for so long that we've missed their revolutionary power. But when you strip away centuries of theological interpretation and truly see what Jesus was pointing to, what you discover is nothing short of a complete revelation about your true identity. This mindset shift is the hidden key that unlocks a completely different journey in your spiritual life. The profound truth is that you are not separate from the divine, desperately seeking some external connection like a cosmic orphan. You are the very expression of divinity itself, living and breathing through divine inheritance right now, in this very moment. This is not spiritual theory. This is the fundamental reality behind your existence. The declaration, "You are God's," in Jesus' consciousness wasn't merely a lofty theological concept. It was a direct recognition of source, expression, and substance. Think about this revelation for a moment. Just as divinity expresses through all creation, through every flower, every star, every breath of wind, the divine expresses through you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your very being are not separate from the creative force that birthed the universe. They are expressions of it. Behind the scenes of our religious traditions lies this transformative understanding that has often been obscured or diluted. Jesus wasn't establishing a path of followers who would worship him from afar. He was demonstrating the impact of living from the recognition of your divine nature and inviting you into that same consciousness. The decisions we make from this understanding are entirely different from those made from a mindset of separation. Throughout history, those who have glimpsed this truth have experienced profound transformations in every aspect of their lives. Their journeys shifted from seeking to finding, from begging to recognizing, from struggling to allowing. This isn't about becoming spiritually arrogant or claiming some special status. It's about aligning your conscious awareness with the deeper reality of your being. If this message about your divine nature resonated with you, hit subscribe to join our community of seekers exploring these profound spiritual truths together. When Jesus proclaimed, "I and my Father are one," he wasn't making an exclusive claim that applied only to himself. He was unveiling the universal truth about every human being's relationship with divine source. This oneness isn't something you need to achieve through decades of spiritual practice or religious devotion. It's not a distant goal to be reached after years of effort. This oneness is the very foundation of your existence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring a powerful metaphor that illuminates this truth in a way that's impossible to forget. When we truly understand the relationship between the ocean and its waves, we begin to see the profound significance of Jesus' revelation in an entirely new light. If you're feeling a resonance with this truth deep within you right now, write in the comments, "I am divine expression." Imagine the vast, boundless ocean and its countless waves. When you look at a wave, what do you really see? The wave isn't separate from the ocean, trying desperately to become oceanic. It already is ocean, temporarily expressing in wave form. Its entire substance, its very being, is nothing other than ocean. The wave doesn't need to strive to reach the ocean. It is already one with it, simply expressing as a unique formation for a brief moment in time. This metaphor reveals the profound truth behind Jesus' teaching. You are not a human being trying to reach God. You are divine life, temporarily expressing in human form. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every emotion you feel, all of it is divine life in expression. The substance of your being isn't separate from the substance of the Creator any more than the wave is separate from the ocean. The revolutionary impact of this understanding can't be overstated. It completely transforms your journey from one of constant seeking to one of progressive recognition. Behind the scenes of Jesus' ministry was this fundamental revelation. He wasn't asking us to follow him like disciples trailing behind a master. He was inviting us to the same realization that he embodied, that oneness with the divine isn't something to achieve through spiritual practice, but the very foundation of your existence. This oneness is already complete, already whole, already perfect. It's not waiting for you to become worthy enough or to perform enough spiritual practices. It's simply waiting for your recognition. The decisions you make from this understanding create entirely different results than those made from a consciousness of separation. When you approach life's challenges from the mindset of, "I am one with my source," rather than "I am separate and need help," everything shifts. Consider the revelations that emerge when you truly grasp this. Prayer no longer becomes about convincing some distant deity to help you. It becomes a moment of conscious alignment with the truth of your being. Healing isn't about fixing something broken, but about allowing the wholeness that is already present to express more fully. Abundance isn't something to chase after, but the natural state of your being when aligned with your divine nature. The mindset transformation that occurs when you stop seeing yourself as separate from the divine and start recognizing your oneness with it completely revolutionizes your entire spiritual path. It's not about becoming something you're not. It's about unveiling what has always been true. This is what Jesus demonstrated through his life, not a special status that only he could claim, but a universal truth available to everyone who recognizes it. When you begin to live from This recognition, your experience of life, undergoes a profound metamorphosis. The journey of spiritual growth becomes less about acquiring something external and more about allowing your true nature to shine through the temporary human expression. Just as the wave doesn't need to become ocean, it already is ocean. You don't need to become divine. You already are divine expression. The hidden truth that Jesus was pointing to through his life and teachings wasn't that he alone was one with the Father, but that this oneness is the natural state of every being. His invitation wasn't worship me as separate and special, but recognize in yourself what I have recognized in myself. If you've experienced even brief moments of this profound sense of oneness with all of life, even if just for a fleeting instant, type, "I've felt this oneness," in the comments below. This revelation completely transforms the very nature of the spiritual journey itself. When you truly grasp what Jesus meant by, "You are God's," something profound happens. Your entire approach to spirituality undergoes a revolutionary shift. Instead of being on an endless quest, seeking something outside yourself, some distant divine connection that always feels just beyond your reach, you begin recognizing what has always been present within you. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a complete recalibration of your spiritual mindset. Most traditions have taught us to view ourselves as spiritual seekers, always searching, always striving, forever reaching for some future state of enlightenment or divine connection. But Jesus wasn't establishing a religion of followers perpetually seeking. He was inviting us into a recognition of our shared divine nature, a recognition that dissolves the very need for external seeking. Joel Goldsmith, one of the great mystical teachers of the 20th century, revealed something profound about this understanding. He taught that grasping your divine nature dissolves the root cause of all human suffering, the belief in separation. Think about that revelation for a moment. The primary source of our pain, our anxiety, our sense of lack and limitation all stem from this single misperception that we are somehow separate from our divine source. When you begin living from the consciousness that the divine is your actual source and substance, not just poetically or metaphorically, but literally, everything changes. The journey of transformation isn't about becoming something. You're not. It's about unveiling what has always been true beneath the layers of conditioning and false beliefs. This isn't merely philosophical theory. The impact of this shift in consciousness creates tangible changes in how you experience your daily life. Your sense of identity expands beyond the limited human personality to include the divine qualities that are your true inheritance and nature. The decisions you make from this place of understanding create entirely different results than those made from a consciousness of separation. Jesus' invitation to become as I am wasn't a call to worship him or to follow a set of religious practices. It was an invitation to freedom from suffering through the recognition of your true nature. He demonstrated what it looks like when a human being fully realizes their divine identity and lives from that realization. The journey he modeled wasn't about becoming something alien to your nature. It was about recognizing what has always been true. When this recognition takes root in your consciousness, you stop experiencing yourself as a separate entity desperately trying to connect with God. You begin to experience yourself as an individualized expression of that same divine life. The boundary between you and the divine begins to dissolve, and you experience a wholeness that has actually been present all along. If you've ever had moments where you suddenly felt a profound sense of connection with all of life, where the feeling of separation briefly dissolved and you experienced a glimpse of this oneness, type, "I've glimpsed this truth" in the comments. Now let's explore what happens when this profound understanding begins to reshape your daily spiritual practices, particularly in how you approach prayer. The practical power of this realization becomes crystal clear when you're facing life's inevitable challenges and difficulties. Consider the stark contrast in mindsets. A person who perceives divinity as distant and separate naturally prays from that mindset. Please God, help me with this problem. Their entire approach stems from a consciousness of separation, lack, and dependency on an external power. It's the prayer of someone who fundamentally sees themselves as cut off from the divine source. But someone who has awakened to the truth that Jesus revealed when he said, "You are gods," prays in an entirely different way. Their prayer isn't about begging an external deity for intervention. It's about recognizing what's already present. They acknowledge that divine wisdom isn't something distant they need to acquire or convince to help them. It's already present within as their true nature and inheritance. This revelation completely revolutionizes the prayer experience. Prayer evolves from a desperate plea to a powerful recognition. It becomes less about asking and more about acknowledging what already is. This mindset shift doesn't just change your words. It alters the entire energy and effectiveness of your spiritual connection. The hidden truth behind Jesus' healing ministry reveals this principle in action. When we examine how Jesus approached healing, we discover something remarkable. He never begged God to intervene from some distant heaven. He never pleaded for divine assistance as though it was separate from him. Instead, he simply acknowledged the divine presence right there in the situation. Jesus recognized a fundamental principle. Where divine presence is acknowledged, wholeness must naturally express. Where divinity flows unobstructed by beliefs in separation, the expression of that divinity is already complete by the very nature of the relationship itself. This wasn't miraculous in the way we typically think. It was the natural manifestation of spiritual law working through someone who fully understood his divine identity. Behind the scenes of every healing Jesus performed was this recognition of divine presence, not as something to be called down from heaven, but as the very substance and reality of the person standing before him. He saw beyond the appearance of disease or limitation to the divine reality that was always present, but obscured by human belief in separation. The transformative impact of this understanding in your own life cannot be overstated. When you approach challenges from this level of consciousness, recognizing the divine presence that is already there, rather than begging for help from afar, you align yourself with the same spiritual principle that Jesus demonstrated. This journey of revelation isn't about acquiring special powers or becoming superhuman. It's about removing the veils of misperception that have hidden your true nature from yourself. If you've ever experienced a moment where simply shifting your perception transformed a situation without any external change occurring, write "perception is everything" in the comments. This profound shift from seeing yourself as separate from the divine to recognizing your oneness with it completely revolutionizes your entire spiritual journey. For your entire life, you've likely been taught to seek God's help as if you were fundamentally separated from divine supply. This seeking mindset creates an endless spiritual quest, always reaching for something that seems just beyond your grasp. But here's the breakthrough revelation that changes everything. Divine resources aren't something you need to hunt down, earn, or convince to come your way. They're your inheritance through the simple fact of relationship. Just as a child naturally inherits traits and resources from their parents without having to beg for them, you naturally have access to divine qualities through your essential connection to the source. When this understanding truly takes root in your consciousness, your entire prayer life undergoes a remarkable transformation. It evolves from begging into recognition, from anxious effort into restful knowing, from desperate pleading into peaceful receiving. The entire energy of your spiritual practice shifts from striving to allowing, from seeking to finding what was always present. This mindset transformation doesn't happen intellectually, it happens experientially. It's not about adopting a new belief system, but about awakening to a deeper reality that was always true before you recognized it. The decisions you make from this place of understanding create entirely different results than those made from a consciousness of separation. Here is the secret that changes everything about your spiritual journey. When you pray acknowledging you are God's as Jesus meant it, you're not trying to get God to do something for you or convince divine power to intervene in your life. You are simply remembering what is already true. Divine life isn't something that might flow to you someday if you're worthy enough. It's already flowing through you right now. Divine wisdom isn't a distant quality you need to acquire through decades of spiritual practice. It's already present within you as your true mind. Divine substance isn't separate from you. It's already expressing as your very being right here, right now, in this moment. Subscribe now to continue this journey of spiritual awakening as we explore what it truly means to live from the understanding that you are God's. Behind the scenes of all effective spiritual practice is this fundamental recognition of present reality rather than future hope. The great spiritual masters throughout history weren't people who mastered techniques for manipulating divine energy. They were individuals who recognized and lived from the truth of what already is. Jesus wasn't establishing a path of follow my teachings. He was demonstrating what it looks like when a human being lives from the consciousness of I and my Father are one, and saying you can live from this same consciousness too. This hidden truth about your divine nature doesn't mean your human experience suddenly becomes perfect or problem-free, but it does mean you approach those human challenges from a completely different level of consciousness. Instead of facing life's difficulties from a place of separation, lack, and limitation, you face them from a recognition of the divine resources that are already present within your being. If you've experienced even a glimpse of this profound truth, that you are not separate from divine source, but are its direct expression, type, I am, divine expression in the comments below. Let me share what makes this understanding so powerful. It's not just philosophical or theoretical, but intensely practical. When this divine realization truly dawns in your consciousness, you begin to experience tangible shifts in your everyday reality. Healing happens naturally, not because you've mastered some advanced spiritual technique, but because you've remembered the truth of who you are as divine expression in human form. This transformation doesn't require manipulating external forces or convincing God to help you. It simply flows from alignment with reality. Think about what happens when you remove a dam from a river. The water doesn't need to be taught how to flow. It simply returns to its natural state. Similarly, when you remove the mental barriers of separation, divine qualities express through you naturally as your authentic state of being. People who embrace this understanding often report remarkable breakthroughs in areas where they've struggled for years. Supply appears more effortlessly, relationships harmonize spontaneously, chronic conditions that resisted conventional treatment begin to resolve. But here's the crucial insight that prevents disappointment on this journey. This recognition of your divine nature doesn't always produce immediate physical results or instant miracles. What it does produce is an immediate shift in consciousness that then gradually manifests in your outer experience over time. This is realistic spirituality, not magical thinking that promises overnight transformation. The journey unfolds naturally, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, depending on how deeply ingrained the patterns of separation consciousness have been in your life. Behind the scenes of every authentic healing is this fundamental principle. Inner transformation precedes outer manifestation. Your consciousness shifts first, and then your circumstances begin to reflect that shift. Consider how a seed transforms into a plant. The moment the seed is planted and watered, its transformation begins, but invisibly beneath the surface. For days, sometimes weeks, nothing appears to be happening. But profound changes are occurring at the invisible level before any visible growth appears. Your spiritual awakening follows this same natural pattern. The recognition of your divine nature initiates an immediate inner transformation that will eventually manifest outwardly, but in divine timing, rather than human expectation. This perspective completely revolutionizes how you approach healing, abundance, relationships, and every other aspect of human experience. Instead of desperately seeking external fixes or magical solutions, you focus on cultivating the consciousness from which all authentic change emerges. Jesus demonstrated the end result of this process, a human being fully awake to their divine nature, and invited us to the same transformation. He wasn't saying, "Worship me as special and different from you." He was saying, what I have realized, you can realize too. The consciousness I live from is available to you as well. If you've experienced a situation where your inner transformation led to outer changes in your life, type "inner creates outer" in the comments below. Now I want to explore what might be the most profound dimension of understanding Jesus' declaration, "You are God's." The radical recognition that you inherit divine nature, not human limitation. This revelation completely transforms what you believe is your natural state of being. Most of us have been conditioned to accept limitation, lack, struggle, and fear as our default human condition. We've been taught that we must strive and struggle to acquire qualities like peace, wisdom, love, and abundance. But this revolutionary understanding flips that entire paradigm. Peace is not something distant that you must acquire through years of spiritual practice or struggle. It is your inheritance, your natural state as divine expression. Wisdom is not something you fundamentally lack that must be painfully accumulated. It is your birthright flowing naturally from your divine nature. The same applies to every divine quality: abundance, joy, love, creativity, and strength. This perspective creates a complete mindset revolution. When this realization becomes your living consciousness rather than just an intellectual concept, you stop operating from fear-based decisions and begin living from divine assurance. Your actions flow from a completely different source, not from the desperate need to get something you lack, but from the overflow of what you already possess in your divine nature. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a fundamental shift in identity. You no longer see yourself primarily as a limited human personality struggling to connect with divinity. Instead, you recognize yourself as divine expression, temporarily experiencing human form. This doesn't make you arrogant or separate you from humanity. It actually connects you more deeply with all life by recognizing the same divine presence expressing through everyone and everything. But this profound truth requires more than intellectual understanding. It needs to become your lived experience. That's where practical application becomes essential. Let me share a powerful practice that helps anchor this recognition in your daily consciousness. Begin by sitting quietly each morning for just 10-15 minutes before your day unfolds. This isn't complicated meditation requiring special techniques. It's simply quiet recognition. The revolutionary aspect is that you don't ask God for anything during this time. Instead, you simply acknowledge the truth. I am divine expression right now. My breath, my consciousness, my very being in this moment is divine life expressing. As thoughts of problems, concerns, or limitations naturally arise, don't fight them or try to suppress them. Instead, gently return to recognition. Divine presence is my true nature. Whatever appears as challenge or lack in my human experience, the divine reality of wholeness and abundance is present now as the truth of my being. Throughout your day, particularly in those moments when you feel yourself straining against circumstances or becoming anxious about situations, pause for just a moment. Take one conscious breath, then silently acknowledge this truth. Divine intelligence is operating in this situation right now. This simple practice creates a remarkable shift in your experience. You'll literally feel yourself releasing the weight of trying to control outcomes through limited human will alone. If you've tried positive thinking techniques without lasting results, comment below with recognition over affirmation to share how this approach feels different to you. As we begin to live from this profound understanding that Jesus revealed when he said, "You are gods," something remarkable happens. The spiritual journey that once felt like an uphill battle transforms into a natural unfolding of your divine nature. You begin to experience life not as a separate human entity struggling to connect with divinity, but as divine expression, temporarily having a human experience. This revelation doesn't make life perfect or problem-free, but it fundamentally changes how you experience those challenges. You approach them from a completely different level of consciousness, from recognition of wholeness, rather than from a sense of separation and lack. And this makes all the difference. I share these teachings because I've witnessed their transformative power both in my own life and in the lives of countless others who have embraced this understanding. If you found value in these insights and want to continue exploring these profound truths that liberate us from limitation and reveal our divine nature, consider becoming part of our community by subscribing. Each week, we dive deeper into these life-changing principles that Jesus actually taught, not to follow him, but to become as he was. If something within you resonated deeply with this message today, if you felt a recognition stir within you as we explored what Jesus truly meant by inviting us to become as he was, rather than merely follow him, I'd love to hear from you. Simply comment, "This message awakened something in me, so I know this found the right heart." And if you found value in today's exploration, that gentle tap on the like button helps others discover these transformative teachings who might be seeking exactly this understanding right now. There's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper, exploring how to apply this divine recognition in healing work. Click and continue with me there as we uncover more of what it means to truly embody the consciousness that Jesus lived from, not as his followers, but as his equals in divine expression.
Joel Goldsmith discovered something so powerful in 1955 that he kept it secret from most students. He called it the invisible treatment, a method that dissolves any problem without effort, prayer, or mental work. This wasn't meditation or affirmation. This was pure consciousness recognizing its own infinite nature. The secret wasn't complex rituals or lengthy prayers. It was the realization that God's presence is already complete, already perfect, already here. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything, you align with what Joel called the already accomplished fact of spiritual perfection. Most students spent years learning complicated metaphysical treatments. Meanwhile, Joel used this invisible method to heal instantly. He would simply rest in the knowing that spirit is the only power, the only presence, the only reality. Nothing else exists to be healed or changed. Tonight you'll learn what Joel whispered only to his closest students. This invisible treatment that works while you sleep, while you work, while you live. The secret that transforms everything without you doing anything at all. Joel tested this invisible treatment on Sarah, a woman dying of cancer in 1956. Doctors gave her 3 weeks. Joel didn't pray for her healing. Instead, he rested in the spiritual truth that disease has no reality in God's perfect creation. He held the consciousness of wholeness. Within 10 days, Sarah's tumors began shrinking. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Joel knew better. When consciousness recognizes only spirit's perfection, The illusion of disease simply dissolves. No struggle, no effort, no mental manipulation required. The invisible treatment works because it doesn't try to change anything. It recognizes what is already true. God is the only power, the only presence, the only life. When you rest in this truth, harmony appears automatically. Reality adjusts to match spiritual consciousness. Joel kept this secret because most people want to do something, fix something, heal something. But the invisible treatment does everything by doing nothing. It's the hardest teaching to accept and the most powerful to experience. In his private journals, Joel wrote that traditional prayer often reinforces the very problems we're trying to solve. When you pray for healing, you affirm that sickness is real. When you pray for money, you confirm lack exists. The invisible treatment does the opposite. Instead of asking God to change circumstances, you recognize that God's perfection is already expressing everywhere. You rest in the completed fact of harmony. You don't treat the problem. You rest in the solution that already exists in consciousness. Joel discovered that when you stop giving power to appearances and rest in spiritual reality, miracles happen naturally. The invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing its own completeness. No words needed, no time required, no effort involved. This is why some students experienced instant healing while others struggled for years. The ones who stopped trying and started resting in truth found immediate freedom. The invisible treatment works when nothing else does because it aligns with how spirit actually operates. The invisible treatment has 3 simple steps Joel never taught publicly. First, stop trying to change anything. Second, rest in the knowing that God's perfection is already complete. Third, watch as harmony appears without your effort or interference. Joel called this resting in the finished kingdom. Instead of working toward healing, you rest in wholeness. Instead of trying to manifest supply, you rest in abundance. Instead of seeking peace, you rest in the peace that passes understanding. When students asked Joel why their treatments weren't working, he would quietly share this secret. Stop treating. Start resting. Stop doing. Start being. Stop trying to fix what God has already perfected. The invisible treatment is consciousness at rest in truth. Tonight, as you learn this hidden method, remember Joel's final words to his inner circle. The greatest spiritual work is often invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in what is already whole. Margaret, a Joel Goldsmith student, lost her home to foreclosure in 1958. She had tried every metaphysical technique, affirmations, visualizations, prosperity treatments. Nothing worked. Desperate, she wrote to Joel asking what she was doing wrong with her spiritual practice. Joel's response changed everything. He told her to stop treating for supply and instead rest in the invisible truth that God's abundance is already flowing perfectly. No mental work required. Simply rest in the completed fact of divine provision. Within 3 weeks, Margaret received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative she never knew existed. The amount was exactly what she needed to save her home, plus enough to live comfortably. She hadn't done anything except rest in truth. Joel explained that her previous treatments were actually blocking her good by affirming lack was real and needed to be overcome. The invisible treatment recognizes abundance as already present, already flowing, already expressing as every needed thing. Robert, a businessman, came to Joel in 1960 with a failing company. He owed $60,000 and faced bankruptcy. Joel taught him the invisible treatment instead of traditional metaphysical methods. No affirmations about prosperity, no visualizations of success. Joel instructed Robert to simply rest in the spiritual truth that God's intelligence governs all true activity. Don't try to save the business. Don't mentally work for customers or sales. Just rest in the knowing that Spirit's perfect plan is already unfolding. Within 6 months, 3 competing companies approached Robert with buyout offers. The final sale netted him over $200,000 after paying all debts. Robert asked Joel how this was possible. Joel smiled and said, "Consciousness at rest in truth moves mountains invisibly." The invisible treatment works in business because it aligns with spiritual law rather than struggling against it. When you stop trying to force outcomes and rest in divine order, right action happens automatically through invisible spiritual activity. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a physician, discovered Joel's invisible treatment in 1962 after watching patient after patient suffer despite medical intervention. She began applying this secret method alongside traditional treatment, resting in the truth that God's healing is already complete. Her patients began experiencing remarkable recoveries, not through her medical skill alone, but through the invisible activity of consciousness recognizing wholeness. She would treat medically while resting in spiritual perfection. The combination created what colleagues called miraculous results. One patient with advanced heart disease was scheduled for risky surgery. Dr. Chen applied the invisible treatment, resting in the truth that God's perfect life governs every heartbeat. The pre-surgery tests showed complete cardiac function restoration. Joel later told Dr. Chen that the invisible treatment doesn't replace human wisdom, but elevates it. When consciousness rests in truth, all right action, medical, spiritual, practical, flows naturally. The invisible treatment enhances everything without interfering with anything. Thomas, Joel's private secretary, witnessed hundreds of healing testimonies that were never published. People wrote about depression lifting overnight, relationships healing instantly, financial crises resolving without human intervention, all through the invisible treatment Joel shared privately. The secret was always the same. Stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything. Rest in the spiritual fact that God's perfection is already complete, already present, already expressing as every needed good. Let the invisible treatment work while you rest in truth. One letter described a mother whose autistic son began speaking normally after she applied the invisible treatment for 30 days. She stopped trying to heal her child and rested in the truth that God's intelligence is already perfect in every child. Joel kept detailed records of these invisible treatment results, but never published them. He feared people would try to use the method to get things rather than rest in truth. The invisible treatment works through being, not doing. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith Wisdom, and comment, what healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the basic invisible treatment, Joel developed advanced techniques he shared only with his closest students. The first advanced method involves consciousness multiplication. When you rest in truth for yourself, you simultaneously rest in truth for everyone. Joel discovered that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are one. When you apply the invisible treatment to your situation, you're actually applying it to all similar situations everywhere. Your healing becomes everyone's healing through the oneness of spirit. He taught this to Martha, who was struggling with chronic anxiety. Instead of treating her own fear, she rested in the truth that God's peace is the only presence everywhere, for everyone. Her anxiety dissolved as she realized she was resting in universal peace. The consciousness multiplication technique works because there's only one consciousness appearing as many individuals. When you rest in truth, you're not just healing your experience, you're contributing to the healing of all consciousness everywhere. Joel's second advanced technique was invisible blessing. Instead of asking for blessings, you recognize that you are the blessing consciousness is giving to the world. You rest in the truth that God expresses as you, through you, in you. When James lost his job at age 55, Joel taught him invisible blessing rather than traditional prosperity work. James stopped trying to find a job and began resting in the truth that he was consciousness's gift to the workplace wherever that might be. 3 companies approached James within 2 months, each offering positions better than what he had lost. He realized that when consciousness rests in its own perfection, right opportunities appear automatically. No struggle, no networking, no desperation required. Invisible blessing works because it aligns with spiritual law. You are not trying to get something from God. You are recognizing yourself as God's gift to every situation. When you rest in this truth, right placement happens naturally. The third advanced technique Joel called temporal transcendence. Most people try to heal the past or secure the future. The invisible treatment works only in the eternal now, where God's perfection is always complete and always present. When consciousness rests in the timeless truth of spirit, past mistakes lose their power and future fears dissolve. You're not healing yesterday's problems or preventing tomorrow's challenges. You're resting in the now where only perfection exists. Joel taught this to David, haunted by childhood trauma and worried about financial security. Instead of treating the past trauma or the future financial fears, David learned to rest in the present truth where God's love and provision are eternally complete. Within months, David's emotional healing was complete and his financial situation stabilized naturally. He discovered that resting in eternal truth automatically corrects both past shadows and future anxieties without directly addressing either one. Joel's most advanced invisible treatment technique was transparent identity. Instead of trying to improve yourself or change your circumstances, you rest in the truth that your real identity is consciousness itself, expressing as individual experience. When you realize you are not a person trying to contact God, but consciousness appearing as personal experience, the invisible treatment becomes automatic. You're not applying spiritual truth to human problems. You're recognizing yourself as spiritual truth expressing perfectly. This technique requires complete surrender of personal identity. You stop being someone with problems and start being consciousness with perfect expression. The invisible treatment then works continuously because you are the treatment. Joel warned that transparent identity was the most challenging technique because the human mind wants to maintain separateness. But those who mastered it found instant access to healing, supply, guidance, and peace without ever having to apply spiritual treatments again. Students often struggled with the invisible treatment because they expected immediate visible results. Joel explained that invisible spiritual activity often precedes visible change by weeks or months. The treatment is working even when appearances suggest otherwise. When consciousness rests in truth, spiritual activity begins immediately, but may not appear in the physical realm instantly. Joel taught students to measure success by their inner peace, not outer circumstances. Peace indicates the invisible treatment is working perfectly. Lucy applied the invisible treatment for her failing marriage but saw no immediate changes in her husband's behavior. Joel encouraged her to maintain her rest in truth regardless of appearances. 2 months later, her husband began counseling voluntarily, and their relationship transformed. The invisible treatment requires patience with the unfolding process. Consciousness works perfectly, but not always according to human timelines. When you rest in truth consistently, harmony appears at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. Another common challenge was trying to use the invisible treatment to get specific outcomes. Joel emphasized that you cannot rest in truth and simultaneously try to manipulate results. The treatment works through surrender, not control. When students tried to direct the invisible treatment toward particular goals, it stopped working. The moment you try to use spiritual truth to achieve personal desires, you've stopped resting in truth and started working from human willpower. Joel taught Gerald, who wanted to use the invisible treatment to win back his ex-wife, that true spiritual treatment rests in whatever outcome serves the highest good. Gerald had to surrender his specific desire and rest in divine love's perfect expression. Paradoxically, when Gerald stopped trying to get his wife back and rested in truth about perfect love, she returned on her own. The invisible treatment works only when you stop trying to make it work for personal objectives. Physical symptoms often intensified temporarily when students began the invisible treatment. Joel explained this as consciousness purifying itself of false beliefs. What appears as worsening conditions is actually improvement occurring at invisible levels. The invisible treatment works by dissolving the mental causes of physical problems. As consciousness releases false beliefs about limitation, sickness, or lack, these beliefs may express more intensely before disappearing completely. This is healing in progress, not treatment failure. Joel compared it to cleaning house. Everything looks messier before it becomes clean. When consciousness rests in truth, false beliefs surface to be dissolved. Physical appearances may temporarily worsen while spiritual healing is completing itself. Students who understood this process maintained their rest in truth, regardless of appearances. Those who got discouraged by temporary intensification often abandoned the invisible treatment just before their breakthrough would have occurred. The final challenge Joel addressed was spiritual pride, the tendency to feel superior because you know advanced spiritual techniques. The invisible treatment only works through humility and genuine surrender to truth rather than personal spiritual achievement. When students began experiencing results, some developed ego about their spiritual advancement. Joel warned that the moment you credit yourself with spiritual healing, you've stopped resting in truth and started taking credit for God's work. He taught that the invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing itself, not personal accomplishment. You don't heal anyone or anything. You simply get out of the way and let truth express its own perfection without human interference or pride. The most advanced practitioners were often the most humble, recognizing themselves as transparent witnesses to Spirit's work, rather than spiritual healers or advanced students. Humility keeps the invisible treatment pure and powerful. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Joel's private student Caroline applied the invisible treatment to her teenage son's drug addiction. Instead of fighting the problem or trying to control her son's choices, she rested in the truth that God's perfect love was already governing her son's life perfectly. For 6 months, nothing visible changed. Her son continued using drugs and missing school. But Caroline maintained her rest in truth, knowing that consciousness was working invisibly to restore her son to his perfect spiritual identity, regardless of current appearances. In the 7th month, her son voluntarily entered rehabilitation and completed the program successfully. He later told Caroline he felt something shift inside him around the time she stopped trying to fix him and started trusting divine love to guide him. Joel explained that the invisible treatment often works most powerfully in relationships when you stop trying to change others and rest in truth about their spiritual perfection. Love works invisibly to awaken others to their own wholeness. Business executive Frank used the invisible treatment during a hostile corporate takeover that threatened to destroy his company and eliminate hundreds of jobs. Instead of fighting the takeover or trying to manipulate outcomes, he rested in truth about divine order. Frank stopped attending strategy meetings focused on defeating the takeover. Instead, he spent that time resting in the invisible truth that God's intelligence governs all true business activity, and that right outcomes would unfold naturally without human manipulation. The takeover attempt collapsed when investigators discovered financial irregularities in the acquiring company. Frank's business not only survived, but received 3 partnership offers from ethical companies seeking his reputation for integrity and sound management. Joel later told Frank that the invisible treatment works in business by aligning activity with spiritual principle. When consciousness rests in truth, dishonest activity exposes itself and righteous activity prospers naturally without human scheming or struggle. Helen applied the invisible treatment to chronic depression that had resisted therapy and medication for 15 years. Joel taught her to rest in the truth that God's joy is her natural state, regardless of chemical imbalances or psychological patterns. Instead of fighting depression or trying to feel better, Helen learned to rest in the invisible truth that consciousness is eternally joyful and that this joy was already present even when not felt emotionally. She stopped trying to heal depression and started resting in perfect joy. Gradually, Helen's brain chemistry began normalizing without medication changes. Her therapist was amazed by the transformation. Helen realized that resting in truth about her spiritual nature had allowed her body and mind to align with consciousness's natural harmony. Joel explained that the invisible treatment works with mental conditions by recognizing the mind's spiritual nature rather than trying to fix psychological problems. When consciousness rests in its own perfection, mental harmony appears automatically. Joel's most dramatic invisible treatment case involved Patricia, whose husband died suddenly, leaving her with 3 children and overwhelming debt. Traditional positive thinking and prosperity affirmations had failed to improve her desperate situation. Joel taught Patricia to rest in the invisible truth that God's love was already providing perfectly for her family, even though current circumstances suggested abandonment and lack. She stopped trying to solve problems and started resting in divine provision. Within 3 months, Patricia's late husband's business partner offered her a management position she was uniquely qualified for despite having no formal business training. The salary covered all expenses plus established college funds for each child. Joel emphasized that the invisible treatment works in crisis by recognizing that consciousness is never actually in crisis. When you rest in truth about divine love and provision, right assistance appears through unexpected channels that human planning could never arrange. After 40 years of practicing the invisible treatment, Joel discovered its ultimate secret. The technique itself eventually disappears when you realize you are the truth you've been resting in. There's no person applying spiritual treatment. There's only consciousness recognizing itself. Advanced practitioners stopped doing the invisible treatment and started being it continuously. They lived from the constant recognition that spirit is the only power, presence, and reality. This wasn't a technique anymore. It was their natural state of consciousness. Joel called this living the completed demonstration. Instead of applying truth to problems, you recognize yourself as truth expressing without problems. Instead of using consciousness, you realize you are consciousness appearing as individual experience. When students reached this realization, miracles became natural rather than special. Healing, supply, guidance, and harmony flowed continuously because consciousness was no longer occasionally treating problems but constantly expressing perfection. Joel's final teaching about the invisible treatment concerned its global impact. When individuals rest in truth consistently, they contribute to the elevation of human consciousness worldwide. Your invisible spiritual work affects everyone through the interconnectedness of all consciousness. He believed that groups of students practicing the invisible treatment could influence world peace, natural disasters, economic stability, and social harmony through their combined rest in truth. Individual consciousness and global consciousness are one appearing as many. Joel often spent hours resting in truth about world situations without specific prayers or mental treatments. He would simply rest in the knowing that God's government is the only real power operating in world affairs, regardless of political appearances. Students who adopted this global perspective found their personal demonstrations improve dramatically. When you rest in truth for the world, you're simultaneously resting in truth for yourself. Universal consciousness and individual consciousness are inseparable. Near the end of his life, Joel revealed why he had kept the invisible treatment secret from most students. He feared people would try to use it to get things rather than rest in truth. The technique only works through genuine spiritual surrender, not spiritual manipulation. Joel had watched too many students try to use spiritual techniques for personal gain rather than spiritual realization. The invisible treatment requires complete surrender of personal will to divine will. It cannot be used, it can only be lived through surrender. He finally began teaching it openly because he realized the world was ready for this level of spiritual truth. Humanity was approaching a consciousness shift that would require understanding of invisible spiritual activity rather than visible religious ritual. Joel's final instruction was simple. Forget everything he taught about techniques and remember only truth. God is the only power, presence, and reality. When you rest in this knowing, everything needed appears without effort through invisible spiritual activity. Tonight, you've received Joel Goldsmith's deepest secret, the invisible treatment that transforms everything by doing nothing except resting in truth. You now understand why he guarded this teaching and why you're ready to receive it. The invisible treatment isn't another spiritual technique to practice. It's the recognition of how consciousness actually operates. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything and simply rest in truth, Spirit's perfection appears automatically in your experience. Your life will never be the same now that you understand the invisible treatment. Problems that once seemed overwhelming will dissolve through your rest in truth. Challenges will transform into opportunities for deeper surrender to Spirit's perfect government. Remember Joel's final words. The greatest spiritual work is invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in wholeness. Tonight, begin your invisible treatment by resting in this truth. You are consciousness expressing perfectly as individual experience. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.